Hello, and thank you for joining me today. Well, this is the Friday, March 31st edition of our video devotionals. We appreciate you being with us today, and I hope your Friday is going well. It is the end of another work week and school week. It's the end of the month, March 31st, and we'll go into April tomorrow. So hopefully everybody can have a good beginning to the month of April. Well, we're going to read to you from our Today book. It is the last day of the month here, March 31st. It says here in 1931, the date that Newt Rockne was killed in a Kansas plane crash. 1850, John C. Calhoun died. 1860, Gypsy Smith was born, and he was a preacher. And I like this expression that he's noted for. Anyone can preach to a crowd, but it takes the grace of God to preach to one man. And then in 1913, the date of the death of J. Pierpont Morgan, and he was, I think, a very, very rich person in his day. So we're going to stop right there with that. And then on Monday, Lord willing, we'll pick up with the first, the second, and then, of course, the third from our Today book. All right, we're going to get into the Bible here. We're going to be in the book of Ruth just today. And we're going to give you an insight from the book of Ruth. And then we'll be ready then for the book of 1 Samuel on Monday. So again, we want to say thank you for all who watch the videos. We appreciate you that do that. Let me also say, I think I've mentioned this and probably should have mentioned it more. We talk about praying for people and situations. I'm going to ask you to pray for our revival. Our revival starts on Sunday morning. So Sunday morning, Sunday night, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday evenings. Our revival will be ongoing. My Uncle Barry Wall will be preaching those times, and I'm going to ask you to pray for our church and pray for our people, pray for the people that will be there. Naturally, on Monday and Tuesday, there'll be people from other churches, other pastors, and they can be encouraged, they can be helped, certainly our own people, myself, and also I pray for, my uncle, the revival speaker, that he'll be blessed and be helped. And then our singers, we've got special singers that'll be singing for us. And so just overall, I'm asking you to pray. There's never too much prayer. You'd be surprised the culmination or any specific prayer that God honors, and we know that God certainly honors prayer, but I'm going to ask you to do that if you would. All right, so from the book of Ruth, interesting story, of course. I want to start in verse number, verse number 19 in chapter 1, and then we're going to skip over to chapter 4. So there's only 4 chapters in the book of Ruth, and it says, "So they two went until they came to Bethlehem. And it came to pass when they were come to Bethlehem that all the city was moved about them, and they said, Is this Naomi? And she said unto them, Call me not Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty hath dealt very bitterly with me. Now notice this, I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me home again empty. Why then call ye me Naomi, seeing the Lord hath testified against me, and the Almighty hath afflicted me? So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, with her, which returned out of the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem in the beginning of barley harvest." All right, just stop here a minute. Naomi, she comes back into home, basically, comes back home. And of course, you could tell her countenance. She was totally a changed person. And she said here very interestingly, she said, I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me home again empty. Well, that's not really true, because when you look up at verse 19, so they two went until they came to Bethlehem. She wasn't the only one that came back. Now, I realize in the very sense of how we speak about things, she certainly left with her husband and herself, of course, and then her 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. They go down into Moab, and they marry daughters. They marry, 2 women there from Moab. And of course, one of them is Orpah, and the other is Ruth, for which the story is named after. So when Dad dies, and Elimelech dies, and Mahlon and Chilion die, then Naomi is left without a husband and without 2 sons, and she's got these 2 daughter-in-laws. So one of them decides to stay back home in Moab, and the other says, I'm going with you no matter what, I'm going with you. So they too come back into Bethlehem. So in that sense, Naomi didn't come back empty. Now, as you know the story, and if you don't know the story, basically then they come back home, and here's this widow and her widowed daughter-in-law. And it just so happens that I think the Lord puts them in the place where they're supposed to be, Ruth, and she goes out into the fields, and there's barley harvest, and she's gleaning, and Boaz notices her and realizes she's a righteous woman, and realizes really what she did to come back with someone that she didn't know only through her being her mother-in-law, but from a different country. And she says, your God's going to be my God, your people will be my people. So that really resonated with Boaz. So as the story goes, to make things right, there would be a kinsman redeemer to take, who would be Ruth, the daughter-in-law, and a near kinsman would marry her and take the inheritance and continue the seed of her husband. So the man that was in line to do that says, I'm not going to do that. So Boaz says, well, I'm next in line. He takes that. So he takes Ruth to be his wife. And then she's married and they have a child. And so as we're here in chapter 4, remember that Naomi said, the Lord brought me home again empty. So as you get down here to chapter 4, Boaz and Ruth are married, become married. And it says here, in verse 11, all the people that were in the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses, the Lord make the woman that is come into thine house like Rachel and like Leah, which two did build the house of Israel. And do thou worthily in Ephratah and be famous in Bethlehem. And then it goes on to talk a little bit more about that, verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she was his wife, and when he went in unto her, the Lord gave her conception, and she bare a son. And the women said unto Naomi, blessed be the Lord, which hath not left thee this day without a kinsman, that his name may be famous in Israel. And he shall be unto thee a restorer of thy life, and a nourisher of thine old age, for the daughter-in-law which loveth thee, which is better to thee than 7 sons, hath borne him. So let's just stop here. When you hear all this, she talked about empty, empty, empty. And then Boaz marries Ruth. And the people start speaking about build the house like Rachel and Leah did. And it says here, and the women said, you've not been left this day without a kinsman. And it says, she is better to thee than 7 sons which hath borne him. So I'm saying, you look at all this addition and all this blessing that she's getting. When she said she came empty, she did as far as how she left. Indeed, she didn't bring her husband back, and indeed, she did not bring her 2 sons back with her, but she did bring back Ruth. And as we find out here, of course, it says here, so Naomi took the child, and then it says there is a son born to Naomi, and they called his name Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. So this little boy is the grandfather to King David. So you look at the blessings there, and we could go and look at all the negatives of the situation going down to Moab, and we could say, well, she never should have left, and they left, and husband and the sons died. But she does come back with this lady, and Ruth, her daughter-in-law, and she becomes a tremendous blessing. And talks about being famous in Bethlehem. We know Bethlehem's famous for the Lord Jesus Christ, but was also famous here for Boaz and Ruth and the little boy that was going to be the grandfather to King David. So what a blessing there. So, I know, the Lord can chasten, the Lord can do things, but the Lord can also rebuild and nourish and get things back. And even, I hate to use the word better perhaps, but the blessings certainly were great that she would have this in her lineage, King David, then of course Jesus. So what a wonderful story, really, in light of all the negative that happened there too. So I hope that's a blessing to you. Some of you can relate to some of the negatives you've had or maybe will have, and how God can turn that around and make it what it needs to be. So I think that's good words for us here on this Friday, this fateful Friday. And the Lord willing, you can have a great weekend, great Sunday, and then we'll see you back on Monday. I ask you to pray for our revival, if you will. I'd appreciate that. And pray for one another. Otherwise, have a great day, and we'll see you, Lord willing, on Monday.